In today's science experiment on forces and motion, we will be experimenting with this question. Does the amount of kinetic energy affect the distance the vehicle will travel? In our previous lesson, we used this thick rubber band with 3 sections. Today, we're using a skinnier rubber band with only 2 sections. Do you think this will have an effect on our vehicle's movement? As a reminder, here is a picture of the previous lesson with 3 sections of the rubber band, and as you can see, it's a little thicker than today's rubber band. In this activity, we'll be using the rubber band with 2 sections, and as you can see, it's a little bit skinnier. Today you'll notice this little tab on the tire, and that will help us guide how many times we are going to wrap the rubber band around the rear axle. In our first trials, we are going to wrap the rubber band around the rear axle 2 times. So watch that tape once, twice, and we will stop right there. On the next trial, you're going to wrap the rubber band around the rear axle 3 times. So again, watch that white tab go around once, twice, and 3 times, and we'll test that. On our last trial, we're going to wrap the rubber band around the rear axle a total of 4 times. So watch the white tab go around once, twice, 3 times, and 4 times around, and then we'll test that. And here's the setup for our track. Notice that the car is placed with its front wheels behind the tape, and our meter stick is placed with the 0 end at the beginning of that tape. So at the front of the tape, that should be about 2.5 to 3 centimeters. And then of course, the other end of the meter stick is where your 100 centimeters would be marked. Here's a close-up once again. You have your 2 tires right behind the tape. The 0 mark is at the beginning of the tape. As mentioned, there's about 2.5 centimeters, and running the total distance up to 100 centimeters on the other end. So here's one example of a test run on our track. I won't give away how many times I've wrapped the rubber band around the rear axle. That way I don't give away any data. But here's an example. As it runs down the track, when it comes to a complete stop, you'll want to measure from the front of the wheel across to see where that data is going to be collected. So we are at about 98 centimeters. If your car happens to go past the meter stick, you would simply make a mark with your finger where the meter stick ends, pick up the meter stick, and start over counting from 100. Then you'll see 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, and about 106 centimeters. Here is an example of today's lab sheet. After answering the first 2 questions, here's where you will be recording your data today. When you wrap the rubber band around the rear axle 2 times, you're going to race down the track a total of 4 trials, collecting data each time. Repeat for 3 turns around the axle, and then 4 turns with the rubber band wrapped around the rear axle. You're going to again collect 4 pieces of data for each trial. Once we have collected all of our data today, we're going to graph our data today on this graph sheet. If you don't have a graph sheet at home, you're just simply going to make 1 line as your y-axis and 1 line across as your x-axis. This represents along our x-axis the number of turns we wrapped the rubber band on our axle. That would be 2 wraps around, 3 wraps around, and 4 wraps around. The y-axis indicates how far the vehicle actually traveled in centimeters. So in our first trial, for example, if 2 wraps around the vehicle went a total distance of, let's say, 25 centimeters, we would graph this up to that line. Let's say on our second trial it went about 20 centimeters. Let's say on our third trial it went about 23. We would mark it about halfway there. And then we did 4 trials, so we would need a 4th bar. We would repeat for the data we have for 3 wraps around, and we would repeat for the data we have for 4 wraps around the axle. So now that the experiment is done, what do you think? Did the amount of kinetic energy affect the distance the vehicle traveled? Well, we have data to support one way or the other, so we'll have a discussion about our data and answer this very question so we can come to a conclusion about kinetic energy as it relates to distance traveled.